So we've had plenty of time. It's been a very relaxed start to the conference or the workshop, and really that was on purpose so that people would get here, but also so that you could talk to each other. And that's one of the major benefits, I think, of days like this, is it gives us time out of our busy little world so that we can actually focus on the important things in life. And in this case, it's all about this idea of trying to really encourage owners to become much more educated about their horse's behaviour. And so thank you very much for making time for this, and I hope that you also make time for yourselves and enjoy the breaks and do talk to each other. Whilst we probably don't have a huge amount of time to be totally interactive during the talks, if you have any burning questions or points that you want to make, please feel free to put your hand up, and I'm sure that the speakers will take the time to answer what you have to say. The point of these talks isn't to try and preach to the converted, because most of you are highly educated and probably much more knowledgeable than certainly I, and certainly know very much about your own area. And I wouldn't try to tell you what you already know, but it is to really try to sort of prompt the different stakeholders in the room to start to think about their particular perspective when it comes to things like horse behaviour and how that impacts on horse welfare, but also on rider and owner safety. And everybody in this room will have a particular perspective, and that's what we want to explore during the sessions this afternoon. So hopefully you're going to be really excited and talking there. So really what we're trying to do is to set the scene from different points of view this morning so that we can then explore them in more detail later. And hopefully at the end of this wonderful day, we will have something to show for all of our efforts, because we want to take this further. We want to have suggestions about what do we do next then. It's all very well having a talk shop, but we want to know where do we go with it all. So it falls to me to kick it all off, to try and summarise, first of all, what we're going to be doing, why we're doing it, but also look perhaps a bit forward at where we might want to get to at the end. Okay, so I've called my little session here, Happy Horses Make for Happy, Safe Owners. And I like to, first of all, before I go forward, because people will be seeing this video, they will see their own pictures in this, because I have plagiarised them. But hopefully with, with their support. So I'd like to thank those people as they see their pictures for allowing me to use them. So why do we need our horses to be happy? Why am I talking about happiness in horses? Well, first of all, because everything that we're talking about now is about equine welfare. And when we're talking about equine welfare, we're talking not just from the veterinary perspective, which traditionally has focused much more on the physical health of the animal, but we're also considering the animal's, the horse's, mental health. We're looking at what's actually going on for it psychologically, because that's the bit that's really all about its emotions. And of course that sort of emotional state is also manifested in the way that the horse behaves. That's the sort of stuff that we receive the end product of. So we're interested in the horse's behavioural health as well. And we're also interested in pulling together information, because we know that equine welfare is key to many of these different bubbles that we've got here. So I've put horse welfare in the middle, and horse welfare is obviously essential from the point of view of equine performance. And I think that there's some challenge to this, because I think there are situations where we know that horses will perform and perhaps their welfare is not particularly good. But one would hope that by educating owners, riders, trainers, judges, that you would be able to demonstrate that having horses that are in a positive state of mind does, of course, improve their ability to perform for us. And that would be through things like trainability. Also, I think we're going to address things to do with rider and handler safety and how that is affected by horse welfare, and also look at things to do with other people who have to handle our horses, the vets and the farriers, and that particular perspective will be looked at by Gemma later. So horse welfare is something that we need to consider when we're talking about educating owners. And the reason that I'm focusing on positive emotions and challenging ourselves to stop thinking about the negative stuff and start really pushing forward to look at how we can make things better for horses is because it's generally accepted that if an animal or a human is experiencing pleasure or happiness, that then its welfare is going to be very good, because its emotional state will be positive, and the animal or the human, in this, if you want to talk about humans, their needs will be met. So really thinking about positive emotions allows us to start to think about the idea that we can focus on good welfare, or we should be focusing on good welfare. And of course, good welfare isn't just about measuring the absence of negative things, it's also about us being able to challenge our scientists to start to look at how can we measure positive emotions. And this is, of course, quite a challenging area. It's far easier for us to look at negative things, just like it's easier for us to say no than to say yes, well done. So the reason that I think that it's important that we start to consider this whole area of horse emotion is because it doesn't just affect the horse's own welfare, but it also affects their safety and their ability to perform in the way that we as owners and riders want them to be able to perform. And this complicated chart here is really just trying to illustrate what happens when we have to look at certain things, how we can look at or trust our eyes, look at what's going on for a horse and start to really characterize them in terms of these different quadrants. Let me have a look and see if there's a thingy stick here. Someone's helpfully put it away. So in this diagram here, which I will try and explain, you can see that there's yeah. So you can see that there's different quadrants. So you've got the horse's arousal from very high to very low. So how excited it is, how, you know, the kind of postures that you would see in excited horses. And you've also got the horse's mood, if you like, its emotion from very negative to very positive. And if we characterize what that looks like, a horse that you could describe as being high aroused but in a very positive state of mind would be a horse that we might describe as excited in a good way, or happy even. And you know, people have described Charlotte Desjardins' performance on her little blueberry horse as being something that seems to fit with this idea of happiness or excitedness. Now, whether that's the case or not, we don't know, because we are not measuring things for the horse here, but it is possible to look at that. At the far end, if you look at horses that are in a very negative state of mind and a very low arousal, you could say that these are horses that have almost given up. So these are horses that have got to the point where they have learned to be helpless. There's not much that they can do to avoid the aids, the signals, the fear, the pain, and they might then just almost be not responding terribly at all. Horses that are in this kind of calm or relaxed state, where they're low aroused but they're in a positive state of mind, would be horses that you might characterize as being at peace with themselves, in a calm sort of frame, and you can start to measure things like their heart rate and so on that would give you an idea of their mental state. And then this is the bit that we're most interested in, is what I describe as being in this quadrant where the horse is very high arousal, but it's also in a very negative state of mind. It's struggling. And here, these are the fearful, the anxious, the in pain type horses, the ones that are still responding, they're still reacting, they're still showing through their behavior that they have a problem. And the more that we start to drive our research, if you like, towards trying to measure things that characterize this, the more that we'll be able to understand it and then, of course, talk about it to owners. So we know that there are behavioural responses that are actually used in dressage judging and so on, things like putting out the tongue, keeping the tongue above the bit, so on, grinding the teeth, agitation of the tail. These things are describing stress in the horse, conflict behaviours, fearful behaviours, and of course things like bolting, bucking, rearing, all of those things are kind of the end product of that, where the horse is showing the escape response because it's just become too awful for it. And I think those things are, of course, very important for us to recognise, because it's all about trying to recognise what's poor for the horse in terms of its welfare, but also dangerous for the rider because the end product is something that is uncontrollable. And so we can describe negative emotions rather well, but we're not that good at describing positive emotions. So, important that we consider the emotional state of the animal. And one of the reasons for this is because horse behaviour problems are on the increase. More people have horses, less people know about their horses, and certainly work that has looked at this. Joe's here today. Joe, you might want to put your hand up, Joe. So Joe Hockenhull has done this sort of work as part of her PhD and continuing it to try to survey owners and ask them, you know, what sort of behaviours does your horse do? Do you consider it to be problematic? And she found this quite shocking statistic that 91% of leisure riding horses in the UK exhibit some sort of behaviour problem under saddle on a regular basis. Very worrying. And of course, these are the range of things that they might be describing, all of them extremely dangerous for them, their horse, other horses, and of course the general public. And when you start to dig into this, we know that there's a whole range of different reasons why these behaviour problems occur, to do with, you might see them to do with the horse being frightened of transport, it might be to do with the way it was weaned, learning behaviour, riding equipment, and so on. So there's a whole research area, if you like, to look at in terms of, you know, where do these problems manifest. But what we do know is that an awful lot of them are learned behavioural responses. They're things that, you know, through proper education of owners could be avoided. And so this is a little mare here who's showing with all her behaviour that she's not a very happy mare. She doesn't want a young man to come and touch her back leg, and will behave in a very dangerous way. And in fact, just a little bit of history about this. This was a case from a number of years ago of a pony called Connie. She was about 14 hands high. But the vet, the referring vet, who was from Aberdeen, referred her in because he said she was, I think he described her as a 16-2 mare, and that she'd put the farrier in hospital, not surprisingly. And she'd had a whole range of other things that she did that really were all about her. She didn't want to be handled, she didn't want to be touched. She was very suspicious of people. And when I said to him, "Are you sure you sent the right horse to the vet school?" He said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, it's only about 15 hands, 14-2 at that, you know." And he said, "Well," he said, "you try injecting her, and then you'll see how big she looks to you." So yeah. So this is a horse that's learned to back people off. And of course these horses end up somewhere. They either end up dead because a vet has been persuaded that obviously it's quite dangerous and there's nothing to be done about it, or they end up going to slaughter if they're in different parts of the world. And here's some data that was from quite a long time ago that Frank Odberg and his colleague found that when they sort of looked at carcasses in a slaughterhouse in France, they found that an awful lot of those were young horses that they felt had actually been there for behavioural reasons rather than for health reasons. Or they're given up, dumped or sold. And sadly, we know that people sell on these sorts of horses with their behaviours just getting worse and worse as they go along, as the horse gathers behavioural baggage and ends up being a real problem and very dangerous. But what's interesting is this is some data from some work that Emma Jones, who was a vet at the vet school in 2003, but she worked with the then ILPH, now WHW, but she said that 25% of the annual intake of that large charity were there due to problem behaviours. So these problem behaviours, they're dangerous, they're all indicating poor welfare. They're things that we don't want in our horses because it makes them unmanageable, and certainly animals that we can't get to perform, and it of course affects their value. But the biggest thing about them is that they're dangerous and they cause huge amounts of safety issues. So it's not just about people being not very good riders. Sometimes it's just about the fact that they don't cope well with those horses, or those horses haven't had those flight responses suppressed and appropriate behaviours put in their place. And so you end up with a horse, you know, lady going out for a nice afternoon's ride on a horse, and she gets bucked off, and it doesn't end with her just landing on the ground and getting back on. All too often it ends with people getting very badly damaged. And when you do the work that I've done recently for somebody for an expert witness case, and you have to dig into safety issues and injuries and mortalities, it is very, very scary, and actually would almost put you off riding your own horse. It's that bad. You know, it worried me hugely. I mean, here's some more horrible facts. in the UK, riders account for more call-outs of the voluntary air ambulance service than any other sporting incident. And injuries aren't just occurring out on racetracks or around event courses and so on. They're actually occurring predominantly when people are at home schooling their horses or just out for a nice hack on a sunny afternoon. Most incidents are falls, but a lot of them do also occur, obviously, when people are trying to handle their horse on the ground. And these are horses that are known to them, that they're handling every day. And we know now that it is dangerous, but it's more dangerous than many of the other things that you might try and tell your children not to do. So I was constantly telling my kids, you're never going to ride a motorcycle, and it's too dangerous. And in fact, then when I started sort of showing them some of these facts and figures, they were challenging me about my stance on motorcycles when I'd been encouraging them to ride horses. No wonder we don't want to ride horses, we'd rather be on the quad bike. So yeah, 20 times more dangerous than motorcycling. And here's something that Silva and Lloyd Parry put together, which I thought was really interesting. Based on all the statistical analysis that they had done on the injuries that had come into hospitals, they were able to describe a typical riding accident. And here it is. It's not related to traffic. It occurs in the summer months between 11:30 and 1500 hours, i.e. when the kids are at school, during fine weather. So you can imagine these are the sorts of people who would be typically people like myself if I didn't have to work. When a relatively inexperienced rider who may well have sustained a previous injury, so it's happening to them a little more regularly, falls from a mare, sadly, doesn't say chestnut, but that has been stabled in an unapproved riding establishment, and then the person sustains a fracture. So that's typical of a riding accident based on the statistics. So this is just normal people. These aren't people who are riding big performance horses. So that's one area of concern, is your normal riders, your leisure riders who are sustaining accidents because of the behaviour of their horses. And then, of course, there's the other area that Gemma's going to talk about, which is the problems for vets and other professions. There's a recent survey that showed equine vets have the highest injury risk of all civilian professions. That's because of our horses. They don't even own horses, half of them. They just have to come out and manage our ones. And then, of course, don't forget our poor farriers, who are actually at the real sort of cutting edge when it comes to us wanting to have little metal shoes put on our horses, and the horse doesn't stand still and reacts to whatever's going on. And sometimes you get owners who aren't even prepared to pick up their own horse's feet, and yet they want to pay someone else to do it. So 70% of accidents are considered to be due to the behaviour and training of the horse. 70%. This is something we can do something about, and we should be able to educate people about. So we can improve our rider-handler safety. There's a whole range of different things that we do to make sure that we're safe. And of course we have education, we have training through Pony Club and so on to try and improve the safety knowledge of our children. But what about the horse? How do we safety-proof the horses that we're riding? How do we safety-proof this? I think this little child, I'm not quite sure who this little child is, but this is somebody's kid that's been kitted out with all the wonderful stuff. But what do we know about that little pony it's on? Has that been road tested? And and what can we do about it? So I've nicked this off the internet, apologies. The question is, are our horses fit for purpose? And this is something that Gemma said to me a couple of years ago when we were talking about this, and I thought it was such a brilliant metaphor, really. This is my son Cal when he got his first driving licence, his provisional driving licence, and this is his funny little red car. And most of us buy our kids quite cheap cars and pop them in there. And, we're talking about the fact that there's no way that I would have put my 17-year-old son in a car and said, here, Cal, here's your car, it's your new car. Just be careful, because the steering doesn't really work very well. It pulls a little bit to the right, and sometimes it doesn't go left straight away. And the brakes are a little bit dodgy, so, just make sure you apply them really hard, and sometimes they fail. And acceleration, that works really well, but sometimes it runs away with you. And then there you go, son, off you go, and be safe and be happy. You wouldn't do that. Well, hopefully as a responsible parent you wouldn't do that. But we do it all the time with the ponies that we stick our kids on at riding schools, the ones that we buy I mean, how do we road test them? How do we know what their behavioural baggage is? How do we know what sort of things make us feel that these animals are safe for our kids to be on? Because the problem is that because there's no real sort of standardised way of doing this handling and training, because there's no real kind of recognition that we need to be able to look at how much learning theory has been used in the appropriate way in the early training and handling of horses, we don't always achieve the desired outcomes in relation to performance. Now, we might actually get the kind of high-level performance. This is me years ago. You can see they're black and white. Me riding a very speedy ex-racehorse a few years ago, you can tell, because we just over-jumped everything. But, you know, that horse there jumped brilliantly. It was an absolute machine. But it was really dangerous to ride, now looking back, you know, because I didn't have brakes. You know, I didn't know much about his early training, and I certainly wasn't really providing the kind of stuff that I should have done to make him safe for somebody else to ride. It was just that, you know, I would get on him and off we would go tally-ho, and all would be well until we fell off or fell over. But, you know, performance success isn't just about being able to win prizes, obviously. It's about being able to demonstrate that your horse is future-proofed for other people to ride. And we know, this is going to be covered later, about the lack of clarity in these training responses and how this leads not just to poor training outcomes, but don't forget that's linked with emotional state. This leads to horses that have this negative emotional state because they're confused. And then we end up with horses that are really, you know, not in a situation where they can control what's happening to them, and they get stronger and stronger aids and put into postures to try and stop them from reacting to the external environment. And of course, you know, all of this is dangerous. Coming right round to the beginning again, this is some clips that were taken not that long ago actually, doing some work in Newmarket, and we just thought this was quite funny, even though it wasn't funny, that, you know, this rider was charging off after its horse. But what I want you to see is, luckily, the lorries in Newmarket stopped for this horse. But just imagine, you know, the accident that could have happened with a rider just getting unseated up on the gallops and this horse, you know, spilling out onto the road. And this is what happens. BHS collect this sort of accident statistic. It'd be good if more people would put more of this stuff in. It'd be helpful for people like me who want to look at it. So, I think I've made the case for the fact that it's important that we start to think about the horse's positive emotions. We need to start to think about the problems that these sorts of negative emotions cause in terms of behaviour. But we also need to think about the other end of it, which is we can try and change the horse, but really we need to change the way that people view all of this. We need to look at changing horse owner attitudes, because if we don't change their knowledge and their attitudes, we're not going to change the way that they behave with their horses. And this is what's called the change curve. Some people call it the grief curve. And it's really just to sort of show that most of the time when we're talking to all of the different stakeholders that we interact with, it can be really difficult to convince them that learning theory, that thinking about horse needs, that motivation, cognition, all of these things are actually important for us to understand when we're interacting with our horse. That you can get horses to do stuff. Any fool can get a horse to do something, but it's actually about trying to get them to do something in a way that makes them safe and gives them the positive frame of mind that we want them to have. So we're trying to move a lot of our people that we're interacting with a position where they're quite satisfied with the way things are going, thank you very much, to a position where in fact you're going to get them to resist quite a bit what you're trying to say. And we hit this quite a lot. And if you can get a lot of these stakeholders around this kind of change curve and into an area of exploration, because something that you say has meaning, whether that's because it's going to enhance the horse's performance or make the ponies more valuable because they're safer or anything like that, at least you've got them to start kicking the tires a little bit and challenging the way that they're thinking and exploring possibilities in terms of then committing to a new way of being. So you can move people from accepting that this is the way horses need to be in order to be top-level dressage horses to a position where perhaps they look a little bit less like they do now and more probably like they used to do before we knew too much. And we're looking always, and the reason I've made this sort of strange thing move around is just because I could, and also because I'm interested in the fact that we need to put horse welfare as that driver the driver for everything that we do. And I don't think it is there at the moment. I think now, it's all about, performance rather than, than the actual horse being the most important thing. So one of the things, obviously, that we need to address a lot more than we do is how we can use evidence-based education and training to change attitudes that will then drive changes in practice whoever we're talking to. And in fact, a little bit later, hopefully Suzanne Rogers, wherever she is over there, will give us a link to a fantastic conference that's going to happen next year that you should all come to. It's all about human behaviour change and how we bring that about. And we need to start to look at the different stakeholders, the people that we're working with, and put them into these sorts of little quadrants. There's little point wasting time on people who are, not going to be the initial sort of drivers of change. We need to start focusing on the people who are actually engaged and have a higher alignment with our approach to using evidence-based information, and get them working with us, and then at least we can then start to drive those ones who perhaps are more challenging to persuade. And there might well be a whole bunch of people that we can name dinosaurs, and we might just say, well, at the moment they're not really ready to engage, why waste your time on them? And I can think of a few of them. We need to start to address how we can make these educational programs, or how we can address educational needs to improve uptake, and also to reward these kind of evidence-based approaches to training and performance. And we need to look at a whole range of different stakeholders and how we make our arguments relevant to them. And that's really one of the things that we're going to address today. And then we need to really start to hone in on what are these potential solutions. And that's what we're going to address in the second part of today, where we start to look, and these are just some examples, at how we can improve education, how we can change attitudes and expectations, how we can promote an evidence-based approach, and how also we can harness influencers and who they might be to help us to really drive forward with the change. What do they need to be comfortable with this whole story. So I'll just end by reminding us all that horses will be horses. I think there was something, I can't remember, some famous person saying that horses already know how to be a horse. It's up to us to understand more about what it is to be a horse. And I think that we then need to train people to have more realistic expectations and to develop a much more equine-centric approach to management and training. And we're not there, and sadly, even though I'm getting old now, and I've been at this game for quite a long time, standing in front of people talking about equine behaviour and equine welfare. And I think it's great to see that we have come a long way, but we've got quite a long way to go, I think, if we're really going to get horses that are healthy, happy and performing well. So thank you very much for listening.